Hey YouTube, AZ Papa Les coming at you today with, I think it's part 9 or 10. I can never remember. Getting old sucks. Want to guess what today's subject is? Wow. You're right. We're going to talk about primers. When primers are those little things you look at the bottom of your loaded cartridge, a little tiny circle in the brass that your firing pin hits, that's your primer. And back in the days, the primer was basically fulminated mercury that was set off to ignite the black powder cartridges in the first cartridges, and it's been updated. It's not just fulminated mercury anymore. But what you're looking at here are some different primers. I use both Winchester and Wolf primers, so that's what you're getting to look at. What do I want to say? This is a box of the primers for shot shells, for shotgun shells, and this is a box of the primers for a large rifle. In other words, like 30-06 7mm Remington mag, 300 Win mag, and stuff like that. But if you look at the size, the box for the shot shell primers is significantly larger. They both contain 100 primers. It's because this one is much bigger than this one. And then if you look again, here's small rifle primers and small pistol primers. Okay? And these are much smaller, and I'll show you here in a close-up in a second the difference between large or small, large, and the shot shell primers, because they just get small as the smallest, and large, whether it be rifle or pistol, they're still the same size, and all the shot shells are all the same size. Everything is standardized, just like all the small pistols. They're all the same size. All the small primers, I should say, whether it be pistol or rifle, they're the same physical diameter around to fit in the same size hole. So let me get the camera set up here, and I'll try and get you an up-close view and show you the difference between the three primers here. So bear with me. What you're looking at here is the small primers, large primers, and this is the primer for the shot shell, the 209s. So you just have a relative comparison for size here. And you flip these over so you can see the other side. The anvils. Oh, this one was already flipped over. But anyway, if you look inside, you can see the anvil. Let's see if I can do this. But there you go. And it doesn't matter. This could be a small rifle or a small pistol. This one could be a large rifle or a large pistol. And this one never changes. Let me give you a shot of the other side of this primer for the shot shells. So there you go. There's the three sizes. Alright, we're back. Welcome back to primer, whatever. There's two standards for primers. There's the Berdan and Boxer. The Berdan primers were actually designed by an American ordnance officer. The last name was Berdan. And ironically, it's the standard in Europe, especially Eastern Europe, and it can be either corrosive or non-corrosive. So the all the surplus ammo you buy for your AKs and SKSs and your Tokarovs and all that stuff, that's all Berdan primed. And it can be either corrosive or non-corrosive. Alright. Now the Boxer, which here comes the ironic part, was designed by a British ordnance officer by the last name of Boxer, and is the standard here in the U.S. for factory and reloading primers. And they are non-corrosive. They used to make them corrosive way back when, but they haven't been corrosive in a long, long time, I think, since, if I remember right, I think it's between World War I and World War II when they changed over to the non-corrosive primers. Anyway, like I said earlier, there's 3 sizes: small, large, and shot shell. And it doesn't matter. There's small rifle and small pistol, and there's large pistol and large rifle. But there's only really one shot shell. And here's the difference, actual measurements in inches. Okay? Now, let's go on here. See how much of this we can see. Okay. Like I said, pistols, primers are both available in large and small. And they're available in standard, magnum, match, or sometimes referred to as bench rest, and match magnum or bench rest magnum. The difference between these 4 is the compound that's inside the primer and how much there is. The magnums are hotter and have more of the chemical compound in it to set off magnum charges, which typically are larger quantities of gunpowder. And the match bench rest stuff is more precisely made and manufactured, and how much is in each one for those guys shooting bench rest and stuff, trying to put all the bullets in one hole. And rifle, again, small and large sizes. And just like the pistol, that's available in standard, magnum, match, or bench rest, and match magnum or bench rest. And then also, here's one of the kicker, is called NATO or the military primers. And the difference between the NATO and the others is that the NATO primer, the metal that the primer is made out of that gets struck by the firing pin is thicker. It's a little stiffer. With semi-automatic weapons like the AR-15 or the AR-10, there isn't a spring holding the firing pin back. It's a floating firing pin. And as the bolt slams forward and chambers around, sometimes the firing pin will go up and hit the primer. If it's a really soft primer, you can get what's referred to as a slam fire, and it will fire off the round, and you don't want that. That's not good. So NATO came out with a spec, a little bit thicker primer to prevent that from happening. Okay? And then the shot shells is basically one standard. There used to be, I believe it's either 156 or 157. I think it was 56. But everything now is centered all around the 209 type for shotgun shells. Okay. Now, like I was saying, there's different manufacturers. Let me get this down here so you can see it. Here's a partial list of the manufacturers for all the different primers. CCI Federal, Remington, Winchester, RWS out of Europe, Wolf, Tula, and Fiocchi. Actually, Fiocchi is actually starting to make some of their stuff here in the Midwest someplace, I read. But most of the time in your reloading books and stuff, you'll see these 4 names, the big 4, listed in the recipes. Okay? These are all relatively newcomers in the last 5 years into the marketplace here in the U.S. And all these manufacturers do make Boxer non-corrosive primers. Okay? I'll skip this for now, but I'll come back to this here in a minute. This next statement down here, trying to get my papers in so you can read what I've got written here. It was very interesting reading. The A-Score company did a study using six different large rifle primers, ranging from standard to Magnum, using the same bullet and same powder in I believe it was a 7mm Remington rifle round. Okay, so these are all large rifle primers. With the same powder and the same bullet, the same cases. The only difference between the loads was the primers. Okay, and they did a big evaluation on these 6 different primers. And what they found was that from the mildest of the primers to the hottest, there was a 12,800 psi difference using the same powder and the same bullet under the same conditions. And the mildest happened to be a standard, and the hottest happened to be a Magnum. That's a huge difference in your pressures. If you look in your reloading books, some of the pressures that some of these chambers are able to handle are only maybe, double to triple that, up to, like 33,000 psi. So you've really got, you can't necessarily interchange from a standard primer to a Magnum primer safely. Everything else staying the same. And they also found out that from the mildest to the hottest, using the standard primers, the mildest happened to be CCI, and the hottest was a Winchester. There was a 9,600 psi difference. So even using a standard pressured, if a recipe calls out for a CCI standard primer and you change it over to a Winchester standard primer, chances are you're going to see a huge increase in your pressure, and it's not necessarily a good thing. Okay, you've always got to be careful and follow the recipes. Okay, and that's why. Okay, and here's some signs of overpressure. The primer on the back of the case, instead of the edges looking rounded inside the case, will actually be flattened and will actually blow out a primer. Okay, you can cause case head separation. You can tell it's starting with the stretched. God, I can't talk today. Stretched case web, and that is the section of the case where it goes in for the ejector extractor to grab onto it, and then it comes out again. That's called the web of the cartridge. Okay, it can actually stretch that out, and you can physically see the difference because it's caused the cases to stretch out to the maximum. You can get stuck cases using brass cases. They'll just expand so much and push so hard you can't get them out of the chamber. And you'll also notice excessive recoil out of the ordinary. And in some cases a really bad thing, which is referred to as a kaboom, where the rifle blows up. So needless to say, you really got to be careful. Okay, and which brings us to the next subject. Always play it safe. Follow the recipe in the manuals. Start with the minimum load and work your way up. Never exceed the maximum loads. Always wear eye and ear protection. That one's kind of important. I've got some friends that have had, in the process of seating primers, had the primers go off. It's a very come to Jesus moment, as I call them. And you'll have to probably go on and change your underwear because it'll scare the poop right out of you. So always wear eye and ear protection. And needless to say, being a smoker, this one applies to me very heavily. Do not smoke while reloading. You're dealing with explosive material. If you want a cigarette, stop where you know you are and go and take a break. Step away from your reloading stuff. Okay, keep distractions to a minimum. try and keep the kids occupied and out of your hair, or the missus, or the mister, or whoever. Keep meticulous records in writing about what you're loading, and make sure it's with the stuff that you're reloading. Keep a book on all the different loads that you're working on, what they are, the primer, the powder, the bullet, the overall cartridge length. As much information as you can write down and write on there. How well does it work in this rifle? Well, in my AR, this load doesn't work worth a poop, but and move on down the road. That way you'll keep from making the same mistakes over and over again, okay? And pay attention to the details. The details. It's all in the details. Like I said, you're playing with explosive products here, okay? The gunpowder, the primer. You have to be careful, okay? And here's some other things to remember, like you don't have enough, is that every gun is different and likes different loads. Even you could take two Savage 111s chambered in 30-06 and side by side, and you're going to find that one will prefer one load and the other one will prefer just a little bit different load to be just as accurate. It's just a difference in the rifling and the manufacturing of the barrel and the gun itself. So work up to the load that works best in your gun. If you've got 5 ARs all chambered in 5.56, and you've got anywhere from 10-inch barrel all the way out to a 24-inch barrel, they're all going to use a different load that is to maximize their accuracy, and you need to load accordingly. In my book, I don't necessarily load to achieve the highest velocity. I don't necessarily load to achieve the lowest recoil. I load to achieve the highest accuracy that I can get out of a load for a gun. So if you've got two guns, you're going to have two different loads in the same thing, and you need to mark what those loads are for which rifle. Now, if shit hits the fan or whatever, yeah, they'll function, they'll work fine, but they just won't be as accurate as they could be. All right. That said, keep your powder and primers in a separate storage place. Again, I can't stress this enough. Primers go kaboom. Powder goes kaboom when ignited by a primer. The farther you have those two apart, the safer you are. Keep your primers dry. CCI and federal and others state that it's not heat that is the enemy for primers, it's moisture. Okay. If you need to keep your primers dry, realize that when the chemical goes into the primers, it goes in a liquid or emulsification type mixture, and it's allowed to dry. And when it dries, it becomes explosive. When it's wet, it's not so explosive, and it's relatively safe to handle. So keep your primers dry. If you knock over and you spill out a tray of primers, pick them up, sweep them up. Do not ever use a vacuum cleaner to vacuum up primers. Needless to say, by doing so, you're asking for a major problem. How do I know? Because I know somebody who did it. Needless to say, he had to go out and buy a new vacuum cleaner for his wife and several new pairs of underwear. So anyway, there's my discussion on primers. And like I said, I was going to go back to this, and I will again, because of the study with A-Square. Like I said, in the books you won't see recipes for RWS, Wolf, Tula, or Fiocchi primers. But, primers can be expensive, especially in shortage times. and you can't afford to pay, CCI prices for something, and Wolf and Tula primers, which are both fine primers, are a lot less expensive. What you need to do is back off and start your loads at a much lower quantity of powder and work your way up to get back to where you were to get your load. It's like anything. Start at the minimum loads and work your way up in steps until you achieve the accuracy or whatever it is that you're looking for with your loads, and do not exceed the maximums. Follow the recipe. If the recipe calls for CCI, realize that, hey, I'm going to have to adjust this some to use the Wolf primer or the Tula primer or the RWS primers. Okay? So please be careful. Ultra careful. Okay? I can't stress that enough. So, I think that's it. Let me look back here on my notes and see if there's anything else I wanted to say. Oh, yeah, I did it. When you're seating your primers in your cases, you don't want them to be proud or sticking out. A proud primer is not a good primer. And you don't want it to be flush with the bottom of your case. You want it to be seated just like 1/1000th or less of an inch below being flush, okay? And that just solves lots of other problems down the road. Functioning, feeding, going through your reloading process, everything else. If you seat those primers, the primer depth just a little bit below flush, deeper into the case, life becomes a whole lot easier. So let me see what else we got going here. Took me several days to write all this stuff down. Oh well, here's rumor control. Many believe, based on rumor and speculation, that of the top four, the big four, that the mildest primers are Remington. The next up towards being more hot are the Federal and CCI, which are kind of tied. And typically Winchester tends to be the hottest. That's based on internet stuff, and may be true and may not be true, but that's a general rule of thumb kind of to look at. So if you're going from up to a Winchester primer, realize that thing's going to be smoking hot, okay? And Remington on the shot shell primers, they make one that they call 410. It's designed for shooting in 410 stuff, but it's the same physical size as the 209. The other manufacturers of primers for 410, they don't differentiate between the two. So there's another note for you that I didn't have written down. Rifle primers tend to have, all rifle primers tend to have a harder material that the primer is made from. And large rifles primers, it's funny, they all tend to be about 0.027 thick, whereas others the small can range anywhere from 0.019 to 0.025. So that was just an interesting note I didn't know before. That's all I got for primers. So, hey, if you got any comments or questions, down below, please. Next time I'm going to try to do powders, something similar to this. If you like this, let me know. Thanks for the inputs on the last video, and I'll see what I can do about doing one from beginning to end. Should I do it on the single stage or should I do it on the progressive? Let me know. Thanks, guys. Y'all take care now. Be safe. And remember, keep smiling. Makes people wonder what you've been up to. Bye-bye.